Hello and welcome to the IOSH Trailblazer Talks, a new series recorded at the 2024 Health and Safety event in Birmingham. Arup's James Pomeroy and Bridget Leathley from The Safer Choice discuss the future world of work. Hello both of you, thank you for joining us in the IOSH podcast booth today. It's really good to have you both here. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good. So, for the benefit of our listeners and our viewers, can you tell me a bit about yourselves, Bridget?
So I'm a human factors specialist working mostly in occupational health and safety. I work across multiple industries. I've done freelance, so retail, manufacturing, transport, more or less anyone who pays. My background was computing and psychology, so I've always been bemused as to why within health and safety we don't make better use of technology coming from the computing side, and why it's taking us so long to understand human factors from the psychology point of view.
And of course, you're a regular contributor to IOSH magazine.
I have been since its very inception. Yes.
And how about you, James? You've recently moved roles, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm the Global Health and Safety Lead for Arup. We're an international consulting practice that specialises in engineering and the built environment. I've worked in safety for about 27 years and have done a variety of roles, particularly in the high-risk sector, particularly marine, aviation, large construction, civils. So that's kind of my forte, and that's the area that I'm particularly interested in working in.
Excellent. And you've also contributed to IOSH magazine in the past. So good to have you both here. So let's start. Obviously, I know that you've just come off the stage about half an hour ago for a really interesting, lively session on the future of work. Can you explore for us the way you each see the future of the world of work, Bridget?
I think, first of all, we're not clairvoyant. We don't have some insight probably that other people don't have. And it's obviously it's a very big topic, which is what we were trying to explore in there. And I think, one of the sort of sayings that came to mind, which we didn't talk about there, is just that we talk about, we always think the impact of technology is overstated in the short term and then underestimated in the long term. So one of the things that we were talking about in there was natural language recognition. And I could remember trying out natural language systems back in the 1980s when they were really awful, and it seemed like we had a very long period of time with some of this technology when nothing seemed to change, and then suddenly we all have Alexas in our home, and I think that's very much the way that technology will go. There'll be a lot of things where we've been playing with the technologies for decades. We've been playing with AI for decades, we've been playing with computer vision, natural language, all of these things, and now suddenly we're finding use cases for them, and that's starting to change the tools that are available to us. I don't think it changes fundamentally what we do in health and safety in terms of we identify hazards and we think about suitable controls. But certainly we're in a new world of work where there's more gig economy workers, people are doing lots of portfolio careers and so on. We're going to have to take account of that in thinking about how we manage health and safety.
And I think building on what Bridget has outlined there, I think the pace of change is really stepping up. We're moving into a world where the example that Bridget used of a technology appearing in the 80s and then perhaps taking 30 years, we're down to technology actually coming through at an embryonic idea to actually really impacting the world of work in a much quicker kind of space now. So ideas that are coming through and being developed around the world, we're seeing evolve into the world of work really quickly. If we think about gig work as a concept, really it hadn't really gone mainstream a decade ago, and now it's proliferated the workforce, the idea of portfolio careers. And then I think there's external factors that are really going to shape the world of work. We're going to be seeing the climate become a much bigger issue. And for almost all of us, we will experience the climate change as a health and safety issue. So I think there's a real change in the pace of change coming through, and our ability to manage and handle and predict that, I think there's a lot of factors at play.
One of the findings from the Arup report that was recently published a couple of weeks ago, I think, with IOSH, suggests that work is likely to become more transient and unstable, which you're alluding to. What do you believe are the main challenges that this poses for occupational safety and health?
A lot of the skills that we use in safety are what we would term tacit knowledge. They're things that you learn on the job. You can't train for. Learning tacit knowledge, whether you're a train driver, whether you're a baggage handler, these are things that actually take time for you to become accustomed to. A lot of your ability to navigate safety risks in the workplace is down to learned experience, what we term tacit knowledge. So that with tenure, you get a shorter period to learn about some of those learned experiences. But then on the formal side, actually, if people are in workplaces for a shorter period of time, that presents a real challenge for formal learning. How do we make it quicker, more effective, and actually make the outcomes more realizable in a shorter space of time? So whether we're talking about informal learning or formal learning, both of them really get affected by the nature of tenure and how that's shortened.
I think there's a double whammy with that.
Sorry.
I was going to say there's a double whammy with that, because if people are working in two different workplaces, it's not just that they've got twice as much to learn, it's the fact that the interfering in one workplace could interfere with the learning from the other workplace. So the example I gave in there was fire procedures. So if I work in one workplace where there's a 2-stage alarm and I know I don't have to react until the second stage, and I'm in another workplace and I think, oh, that's only the first stage alarm, and actually that's the signal to get out, you've got that. So even with something really simple and basic, you've got people having to understand different processes in different workplaces.
And when you were saying about sort of the learning and learning on the job, that's what makes it even more important to retain your workforce as well, doesn't it?
I think wherever you can to retain the workforce, but there's equally a need to look at how you're training and how you're learning. The systems will need to adapt. We may need to face the reality that a portfolio career, a transient workforce, is in some sectors actually unavoidable. So then how do we review how we train and equip people? And we're seeing various ways of adapting to that. But I think, as Bridget outlined earlier, there's also some other areas that really make it more complex. If we've got individuals who, because of the cost of living crisis or because of choice, they want to do 2 jobs, or perhaps they're doing a portfolio of perhaps 3 jobs, how do we manage things like fatigue? So it's as much about learning, and it's as much about actually understanding the boundaries and addressing the kind of issues that we're seeing migrate from one role to the other.
That's really, really interesting. And who's responsible for it, I guess? So, Bridget, I know you're particularly interested in the effects of the physical and psychosocial working environment on safety outcomes. How can we use that knowledge to improve workplace safety?
I think some of those things we've already alluded to. So if people are having multiple jobs, then if somebody's in a single job, we know that we can manage their shift systems. And there's a lot of research that's gone into shift patterns and how we make sure that people have adequate periods of break between shifts, and whether night shift, what the impact is of night shifts. If people are doing multiple jobs, you no longer have control over that. So that's going to be an issue just in terms of people doing more hours of work. I think when you then you start throwing in some of the climate issues that are going to come, even sort of a 5-degree rise in temperature in the summer, when we have a heat wave, increases the number of accidents that people have. So that's going to make a difference as well. And I think we need to start thinking, if we're looking at risk assessments for, say, outdoor work in particular, but even indoor environments where we can't control the temperature fully, we need to be looking at what the impact is of heat on people in those sort of situations as well. So there's going to be a lot of extra health and safety issues coming up, from the gig economy that we've already talked about, but also from those climate impacts as well.
So what about the role of AI? As we see a potential increase in its use, does it pose any risks or challenges that OSH professionals need to be aware of?
It's interesting, when Bridget and I and Carl actually ran the session, we asked actually who had training in digital literacy, who had training in kind of the skills to actually understand these types of opportunities and risks. There were a few hands, but not many. So I think as a profession, to understand both the risks and to seize the opportunities, we're going to need to upskill. There are areas that we're getting into that we really need to think more about. Do we understand truly how the algorithm works? Do we understand who's affected? Do we understand the bias of who's actually created that algorithm, let alone any of the technology issues? So the more that we get into AI, the more that we're going to get into more challenging areas about rights and responsibilities. So to give you a very prime example, we saw when we introduced black box technology within aviation, how that changed the nature of investigations. Suddenly the technology and who owned that technology in the event of an incident became really powerful. And you had to think about access and rights and the ethics about who had access to that. We're going to see similar technology work through the workplace, and we're going to have challenges, both ethical and practical, that we haven't necessarily addressed before, let alone some of the technology challenges about do we understand how to use and apply this technology correctly.
And I think some of those challenges are not necessarily to do with the technology in itself, but they're just to do with our normal cultural issues. So at the moment, if I was in a workplace with a health and safety manager, and the health and safety manager saw somebody breaking a rule, shall we say, doing something that's not sort of standard procedure, how would they respond to that? Would they respond by sort of shouting at them and saying, what the heck are you doing? Why are you doing it like that? I'm going to discipline you. Or would they go, oh, is there a problem with the way you're supposed to, you should have gone round the long way. Is there a reason why you can't do that? And I think what happens when we start having computer vision systems in place, for example, is it's the same challenge, but now instead of it being the safety manager who happens to spot an observation, it's the computer vision that's going, okay, 10 people today cut across the vehicle route. So now what do you do about it? And again, do you just discipline everybody and shout and rave? Or do you go, well, hang on, what's wrong with the design of our walkways in our workplace? How do I use this to design a better workplace where it's easier for people to be safe? And it's always got to go back to, well, if we use any of these technologies, whether it's good old-fashioned CCTV, black boxes, the spy in the cab, computer vision, AI, are we using it in a way within a culture where we want to learn why people aren't able to do things safely, or do we want to use it in a way that's punitive and damaging?
I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we have with the technology. So many of the prototypes and examples that are coming through at the moment aren't necessarily thinking about the benefit to the worker.
No.
So if you impose technology on a worker to monitor whether they're using protective equipment, that's quite Orwellian. How do we think differently about what the value and benefit that we bring to frontline workers is? And the more that we get into climate, the more that we're going to have to be monitoring for heat. We're going to have to be getting clever about advanced notices of when unprecedented weather events happens and being able to alert people. And we're really going to need to scale up our ability to predict, to warn, to monitor not only the environment, but actually potentially body. So how do we start to use this technology where it benefits the worker and they actually see it as a benefit and not another form of digital control?
I think that's maybe where we could start to learn from other countries, because I know Australia have had heat monitoring tech for external workers for some time. So we could perhaps learn from their experience as to how they're using it.
Absolutely. Obviously, it was Health and Safety, World Health and Safety at Work Day on Sunday. It was this year. And we reported it on IOSH magazine, and there was a survey that revealed that more than 7,500 people die globally every day due to unsafe and unhealthy working conditions. What can we do to change this figure? I know it's a huge question.
Bridget. Yeah, can I have a dollop of world peace, please, and a side of harmony and love at the same time? Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice?
I think we've obviously made huge strides in this country in terms of accidents. We've reduced our fatality rate. Obviously, any one fatality is still one too many, but we have made huge strides in that direction. And we get a few road companies. The waste and recycling area, I know, is a particular problem at the moment when you look at the stats. 5 deaths in a single incident. So clearly, those sort of things. There's nothing new or modern that you need to understand about those things. The rules were don't build a wall beyond this height. They built a wall beyond that height. They overloaded the wall falls on people. So there's some really sort of fundamental things that, and I don't know, what is the solution? More policing to that? Can we afford more HSE inspections? It's a difficult one. But actually, I think where the biggest bang for our bucks comes, as we probably all know, anyone listening to this will know, is actually on the health agenda. And obviously, we've got this historical asbestos. What worries me is that I still come across people going into buildings that they don't know, ticking a box on a signing in book to say they've seen the asbestos register, and they haven't even looked at it. So we still have a problem with that. As James has talked about climate, that report also talks about the problem of air pollution, and air pollution is going to get worse with climate change, and as things get hotter, the air becomes more dense and so on. It's going to make those air pollution issues, unless there's something we can do about it. But I think that's where the biggest bang for our bucks is going to come, is focusing a little bit more on that health agenda and thinking particularly about how do we protect people from heat, how do we protect them from air pollution, how do we protect them from UV. So that's a real call for people who have got external workers. It's less of an issue for indoor workers, but people outdoors are very heavily exposed, and that's only going to get worse as time goes on.
I think the challenge for the profession is to make sure that they're adequately influencing at the right level. Climate change is going to require fundamental changes in how many organisations and work is conducted. During peak summer periods, it may well be impossible to actually work outside. It just may be far too hot. There are countries already that actually reschedule work, so it starts 4 or 5 in the morning, or work is undertaken in a remote way. So I think the challenge for safety professionals, particularly as we get into climate and it becomes much more of a strategic issue, is are they thinking about those psychosocial factors, and are they getting involved in the decisions in terms of how work is set up and planned? I think the other kind of challenge for the profession is to think about the nature of safety in a much more complicated, complex environment. So the example for us here would be the pandemic. Every organisation I ever knew actually had the pandemic on a risk register before the pandemic. They all identified it, but identifying a hazard and thinking through how a scenario unfolds are two very different things. So we learnt the importance of safety focusing on agility, adaptation, and really thinking about how they help and support the business think through in real time. That's a new skill set: agility, adaptation, and dealing with complex risk. And I think we're going to see more of that. And the challenge is how we respond as a profession and understand that the ability to predict and control and potentially proceduralize may not work in a really highly complex adaptive risk like climate.
So returning to ethics, you mentioned it earlier when we were talking about AI. Ethics will be an important theme. There's a session tomorrow on social ethics and professional ethics. The rapid shift to remote working, obviously from the pandemic as well, has presented employers with new workplace ethical dilemmas. What are they, and how is the profession dealing with them, do you think?
I mentioned to the people listening today that I think that a lot of managers are between a rock and a hard place, because on the one hand, if you sort of say, well, okay, I want to protect all my workers, so I'm going to monitor them, I'm going to have conversations with them twice a day, they have to phone in and say that they're okay, then you could be accused of micromanaging or even spying on them. On the other hand, if you just say, well, okay, they know what they need to do, they can get on with their job, they know where to call me if they need me, you then have cases, and there have been cases where people have ended up feeling isolated and depressed and lonely because maybe they live on their own, especially during the pandemic, and there's no check-in for them. So actually trying to find a balance with that is really difficult for managers. So I think managers are in a very hard place in this sort of new working environment to find the balance. And the problem being that the right balance for their relationship with Jim might be different from their relationship with Fred, because people have different needs. They might have family at home they can talk to, somebody else might not. So I guess that's something about knowing your staff, knowing what they need, and then trying to build that relationship where you check in enough with people, you monitor them enough that you can bring things back on track if things go off track, but not so that people feel like you're spying on them and that they're being micromanaged. So I think that's one of the difficult ethical decisions within that. I think there's obviously we talked about the sort of the ethics already of the AI, but the other thing with the monitoring is, if I have a black box in my pizza delivery fleet, and I'm doing it because I want to know, where are my pizza delivery workers? Are they safe? Are they okay? Are they being attacked? And so on. So that's fine. But if that then produces data which says, oh, well, actually, the average time to deliver pizza from that end of town to that end of town is 20 minutes. And you then set that as a target for people to say, right, from now on, that delivery has to be done in 20 minutes. You'll then end up with some pizza delivery drivers having to speed to meet it. So we can start off, you get this scope creep. We start off, the idea of this technology is to support our lone workers. So we can monitor them so we know they're safe. And then you go and use the data to performance manage them, basically, in a way that could be actually quite dangerous.
Yeah, I think if we, explore some of the examples that Bridget has outlined, I mean, they're fantastic, real examples to think about as a safety professional. So how much are safety involved in decision making around algorithms and code? So we have many scandals that are in the press these days about how data is used, and data's wrongly being used against people. And we're going to see more of that. So there are questions around how algorithms are developed, who developed it, what is the effect of a simple algorithm such as Bridget's used, where we've got a target setting for someone to do a delivery schedule. I mean, there's a reason that for many delivery companies, actually, a lot of their major incidents are happening in the final hour of the day. That's because people are rushing, and the algorithm's driving them to rush and sending them behind target. And we see a lot more of these sorts of examples. So I think the challenge is to what degree the safety individuals in the workplace are involved in the development of algorithms and code, its application, and are thinking about probably the unintended consequences of it.
So you've both covered quite a lot of what this next question asks for, but what can IOSH professionals, or what are they going to need to consider going forwards, and mainly in response to the challenges that we've outlined here today?
I think there's two sides to this equation. So one is what skills the professional needs for themselves, and then there's how do they make sure that the people who are doing the jobs have the competencies that they need. And I think on the first side, we've always, as health and safety professionals, I came in with a background in computing and psychology, not with a background in health and safety. I had a background in management as well. And I've built on that with various courses over time. We've all learned a little bit about law, we've all learned a little bit about HR and equality and so on. So we've always had to bring in other skills as well. I mean, it's one of the things I've been pushing through, conferences, articles and so on for the last 25 years is actually we need to educate ourselves about some of this digital. I think not all of it, maybe the reason only 5 people have been on that is because the training, I don't know that training is readily available in a form that's suitable for people. So I think a lot of it is we have to read around, we have to watch things, we have to come to events like this. And even if we're not planning to buy some computer vision AI this week, go and talk to the people on those stands and find out what they're doing. Talk to these companies about what the technology is so that we are educated about those. We need to understand about data security, personal data, cyber security. We've really got, there is no limit really to the knowledge that health and safety need to know a little bit about, I think, in that sense. The other side of the equation then is obviously how we bring competence to people. And one of the things we discussed in the panel quite a lot was how if people are no longer coming to a job for life, and they've got 2 weeks of induction training, they're instead coming and they're going to be maybe with you for a few weeks, just in time training. How do you do manual handling in 10 minutes so that they can do the job they're doing today? They don't need to know everything they need to know about manual handling. They just need 10 minutes of how to do this particular job safely. And whether that's video-based training for some topics, whether it's hands-on training for others, we have to think about that just-in-time approach to training, I think.
Yeah, I think Bridget is absolutely right in terms of thinking through digital capabilities and skill sets that we need as a profession to ready ourselves. I think Bridget's also right to highlight the role of psychology. Bridget has a background in psychology, and that's really helpful. As we use more and more technology, we could fall into a trap of thinking that behavior is logical and people are going to use this technology. But we always know that actually behavior works in very strange ways. So thinking through, when you introduce a piece of technology, when an algorithm's introduced, that it may not work in a cause and effect way, that behavior is peculiar in terms of how we do that, and engaging with workers to think that through, I think is really important. I think the other thing as we get used to technology is getting comfortable with things like piloting, getting safety professionals used to the idea of trying 2 or 3 bits of technology in a structured pilot and being prepared to accept that some of them won't work, rather than putting all of their chips down on one particular piece of technology, is the kind of thing we're going to need to get comfortable with. The nature of work is going to get faster. We're going to need to make decisions, and we're going to need to adapt much more quicker. And that's going to be quite a profound challenge for us.
Do you think that technology and future-proofing for the health and safety profession should be standardised? Should there be a universal global standard covering this kind of thing?
I think I would probably challenge the idea that you can future-proof anything, because under that is the idea that you can predict anything. I certainly think as a skill set, we have to get a level of proficiency in how to do digital innovation. Data literacy would be another area. These aren't everyday skills that are needed now, but if we look out 4 or 5 years, we absolutely will need these skills. We'll soon, because of the technology we're rolling out, be absolutely swimming in data. And the organization will be introducing levels of digital transformation. So we need to think about, have we got the right skill sets to adapt to that, to contribute, to understand, and to think about where there may be biases potentially that we haven't thought about.
And Bridget, you've got a background in computing, but for the ordinary health and safety manager, do you think this is quite overwhelming or intimidating, all of this?
There was an IBM report that came out last year about AI and the future of AI in the workplace, and we covered it in IOSH magazine. And I think one of the sayings that they had with that, which I thought was really was a real takeaway, was that AI is not going to replace people, but people who can use AI will replace people who can't use AI. Yeah. And I think that's the really important thing to remember. We're not talking about learning to code, learning to program. I have to say, although I got off first, I was rubbish coder, right? Really, really bad. But I knew how to talk to programmers. I knew how to talk to programmers about the user interface because I was coming at it from the psychology point of view, and I knew the language that I needed to talk to them. So I think we do need to develop an understanding of it at a kind of black box level. We don't necessarily need to understand everything that's going on, but we need to understand for this input, what's the output going to be? What are the uses of this? I think the other danger with any of this technology is that we go, oh, we've got this whizzy, shiny new thing. Where's there a problem that I can solve with this? And we have to not, sledgehammer cracking nut time. I saw this happening very much with VR. I mean, I got very excited about virtual reality, and there were some really good uses of virtual reality. I also saw some very poor uses of virtual reality where you spent 25 minutes setting up a headset to show a video you could have shown on a screen in 10 minutes. So we have to not do the same with AI. And again, with this data, we have to be really careful about what it is that we want to collect, because it's capable of so much. It's capable of collecting so many data points. We could be overwhelmed, and we could start seeing correlations in the data which don't actually apply to anything in the real world. So we might start to find, for example, that, this type of person is not wearing their PPE, and it might be a spurious correlation, because if you have enough data, there will be correlations in it that mean nothing. So we have to be, and just understanding that. I mean, James is nodding because he understands data, but I know a lot of people don't always get that. So I think there is probably some basic data literacy that everybody could do with having. But on the other hand, we all work in teams. So maybe if you're somebody who didn't get on with maths at school, just make sure you've got somebody in your team who understands the data and who can advise you on that. We don't all have to have all of the skills. We can share that around a team when you're working with a team of people.
Brilliant. I think there's an article in there, Bridget, for IOSH magazine.
Thank you both so much. It's been really, really interesting to speak to you. And thank you for joining me in the booth today. Thanks for listening. Join us next week for more Trailblazer Talks from the IOSH podcasts.